Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Michael Yardney podcast. Today, leading demographer Simon Kuestenmacher and I are going to explain why the 2030s is going to be an outstanding decade for property. Now, every now and then, we have a significant strategic shift, a shift that creates a substantial property boom. And today you're going to hear why Simon believes the great wealth transfer of up to $6 trillion as baby boomers die off is going to create an outstanding property and economic boom. And he'll explain to you when he thinks that's going to occur. Now, today's show is the third episode of the new weekly podcast I'm delivering with Simon Kuestenmacher that we call Demographics Decoded. Over the last 4 years, Simon's been one of the most popular regular guests on this podcast, and because we both believe that demographics is going to be one of the main drivers of our property markets, our businesses and economics moving forward, we're publishing a separate podcast, a separate show we're calling Demographics Decoded, where we're going to unravel the trends that are going to shape the future of your investment decisions, your business strategies, and your organisational planning. Now, we launched the show a couple of weeks ago, and the response has been incredible. So thank you for everyone who's already subscribed, and those of you who've already sent us messages and commented and shared your excitement with us. While you're hearing the show today on the Michael Yardney podcast, Demographics Decoded, as I said, has got its own channel on all podcast apps and on YouTube. So to keep getting these episodes, because we're not going to play them every time on this show, on the Michael Yardney podcast. So to keep getting the episodes, you need to subscribe on your favourite podcast app, the one you're listening to right now, or if you're watching this. So just stop for a second and subscribe to Demographics Decoded. Just search for it and subscribe. I'm going to be running the show here on the Michael Yardney podcast just to give you a taste of what's ahead. But this is, I'm not going to do this every week anymore. So please stop for a moment, look for Demographics Decoded, and by the way, to make it easy, I'll leave you a link in the show notes as well. So on with episode number 3 of the Demographics Decoded podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And as I said, please remember to subscribe.
Hello, this is the Demographics Decoded podcast with me, demographer Simon Kuestenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping our futures. In this episode, Simon and I are going to discuss how Australia is on the precipice of a monumental financial shift, what some call the great wealth transfer. The baby boomer generation, who rode the wave of economic prosperity for decades, is now reaching retirement age and passing on a staggering inheritance estimated at somewhere between $5 and $6 trillion over the next decade. Now, this vast sum of money promises to reshape our housing markets, the economy, and even possibly the nation's social fabric and political landscape. But its impact is going to be far from uniform. So to understand where the winners and losers are going to be, I'm like to have a chat with Australia's leading demographer, Simon Kuestenmacher. So, Simon, this is the third of our Demographic Decoded podcasts, and boy, has there been a lot of great feedback for the first couple of shows. We've received some great feedback from the viewers and listeners.
It's great fun. What can I say? I do nothing all day than look at demographics, and I'm always happy if people are willing to share in this joy.
Well, our aim is to give people some idea of what's ahead, and this is particularly useful for business people, entrepreneurs, employers and investors. And I believe Australia's, well, not only I know we do believe Australia's on the cusp of a financial revolution. As I said in the introduction, the baby boomers, that post-war demographic, the wave that reshaped our society and our housing markets for a number of decades now. I'm a baby boomer, entering the golden years. We've spent years climbing up the property ladder, accumulating assets, building careers, but the baby boomers in general now preparing to pass the torch on, and a hefty chunk of their wealth to the next generation. And as I explained, it's been dubbed the great wealth transfer, could even be up to $6 trillion over the next decade. Simon, that's a figure so vast. How do you comprehend $6 trillion? But I'm sure its impact is going to be significant moving forward. So can you maybe give us some context to start with? Has anything like this ever happened before?
No, it hasn't. So the reason why we talk about this as such a special event is that the people that are about to hand over wealth happen to be a rich generation that also happens to be a gigantic generation. So that is quite nice. So, there is this big chunk of money changing, and that then, it remains to be seen what happens with it. But we'll today have a look at what will happen, but we know that it's going to be a big thing that is going to occur.
Well, there's a growing trend amongst baby boomers to transfer their wealth currently while they're still alive, often called living inheritances. I call it giving with the warm hand rather than the cold hand later on. This approach has allowed many parents, including myself, to witness the benefits of giving financial support to our children and our grandchildren. I'm in the very fortunate position to be able to help my kids pay the grandchildren's school fees. But this has also affected our property markets and the broader economy, with the bank of mum and dad being a very significant influence on allowing some people to get into the housing markets. But unfortunately, not everyone's got that luxury.
Yeah, and so the bank of mom and dad is, for the individual family unit, it is an outrageously fantastic tool. Because what you do is you hand over wealth from one generation to the next. That's cool. You do this anyways, but you essentially almost double your investment. What I mean by this is, assuming you get an interest rate of 5.3% over 30 years for your mortgage. That just means that what you pay the bank is exactly 2 times your mortgage. So a $500,000 mortgage, you pay $1 million to the bank under this circumstance. At the moment, interest rates are higher, but let's do this for easy maths. If you, as a family, as a grandparent or as a parent, pay your kids the inheritance forward and you give them $100,000 now so that they minimize their mortgage, you do not give them $100,000 economic benefit. You give them $200,000 economic dollars benefit. So it's actually quite a big difference. And this is where the discussion comes from. Well, we're dividing Australia into an asset owning and non-asset owning class, because you get so much economic benefit from the assets if you can hand them down within the family, that an identical couple or two identical couples where one has the bank of mom and dad in the background, the other one doesn't, you really give one an extreme leg up on the property market and overall the whole wealth creation journey. So it's an absolute no-brainer for individual family units, if they have the capacity to do so and to act as a bank of mom and dad. It's a great financial tool. So this should be done. But at scale, how much do you do this? These involve awkward conversations about wealth. To hand over wealth right now to the next generation, you need to be somewhat comfortable with the idea that you don't need this wealth in your near future. That can be absolutely awkward for people that are handing over this wealth. So you probably find quite a few people that are reluctant in doing so. And we then end up with a situation where you only hand over wealth when the last parent dies, and that's mom, because she has 4 years longer life expectancy than dad. She is also 4 years younger. So it's pretty easy to actually time, demographically speaking, when this wealth transfer will occur. And we can then have we have a clear understanding what this wealth looks like. The vast majority of this wealth that we're handing over sits there in the shape of a family-sized house that will be handed from, then dying mom to she probably has 2.5 kids on average, and we'll be handing it to those kids. And then those kids can sell the house, they can split the profits, they can develop the house, meaning they can bulldoze the house and build 2, 3, 28 townhouses on top, whatever they can squeeze in there. And that changes our cities in a permanent and very significant way.
Well, let's talk about that just a little bit further, because when the mother eventually does pass away, and I've seen some great research that you and the demographics group have done about when this is going to occur, there's going to be a peak of this transfer down the track. When do you see this big wealth transfer occurring?
Well, the absolute peak, the crescendo, is 2041. And the way we know this is we just count the number of baby boomer and older women in the demographic forecasts, and we see that this number gets smaller and smaller every year. And this gap from year to year, we could call them instances of baby boomer women deaths, but that's a bit morbid, or we can call them instances of intergenerational wealth transfer, much more clinical. And we'll see 77,000 such instances today, or this year, and then this will go up every year until it reaches this crescendo in 2041 at around 135,000 deaths per year or something like this. Then it will stay elevated throughout the 2040s. So the 2030s and 40s will be absolutely wild decades on the Australian property market, because you have so much property coming online that wasn't online before. These are people that held their property for a long time.
Baby boomers are staying in their home. They're not wanting to leave. They're not wanting to go to retirement villages, are they?
Yeah, it doesn't look it, at least at the moment. It looks like that what baby boomers tell you is that the majority of them wants to be carried out of their house. That could be considered as a way of downsizing into the box. But more than anything, boomers want to stay put. That's the main goal here. And so you go, okay, cool. So you stay put. But so that means the family home only enters the housing market once the last parent dies, after decades in ownership. That then means that these NIMBY suburbs, where most of those baby boomers are located, at least in Australia, are the middle suburbs, where they blocked or vetoed development as much as they could. And now all of this enters the market in the 2030s and 40s. That means you will see development, the densification of the middle suburbs for the first time in forever, really, at scale happening. That is exciting. That, of course, will be done by small to medium scale property developers. A land lease will not build townhouses on small blocks, but the small developers will have their golden decade. Anyone who's making money in property, auctioneers, mortgage brokers, all those folks will have an absolute marvelous decade, because the number of transaction goes up like crazy. Also, who's going to move into those townhouses once they are developed? It's not going to be the young folks of tomorrow who then need family-sized homes. No, it will be the millennials who now in this decade move to the urban fringe of town, who then move back in closer to town into more desirable suburbs. And then you'll have the Gen Zs moving into the old millennial houses on the urban fringe. So the average length of stay in a house also gets shortened. That means so much more property transactions. Just having a pie of these transactions is a very lucrative business model. And of course, we're densifying suburbs. All of a sudden, the middle suburbs will have much higher populations, so much more traffic, much more very predictable conflicts there with neighbors hating the new developments and so forth. I would say that is a certainty at this point in time. And so we know how our cities are changing. It sounds always like it's just somebody gets more money into the generational wealth transfer. No, we are completely overhauling the way that our country looks and feels like. Quite impressive, actually.
I guess there's going to be other economic impacts as well, Simon, because the generation who's going to inherit this money are already going to be reasonably established. They're going to own their own homes. The children of the baby boomers, their children are already going to have moved out of home. There's going to be a bit of cash splashing around.
Yes, because the millennial kids, when they inherit their baby boomer parent wealth, they get it at an awkward stage of the life cycle, late 50s, early 60s. You don't need money then. The kids are out of the house.
Yes, you do. But you don't need it as much.
They will not complain about wealth. It's not the most crucial phase, because the big spending years of the upgrader home, they don't need that. So millennials might stay in smaller homes. They might not go to the big upgrader homes, because when they inherit money, both kids are, their 1.7 kids are already have moved out. So what do you do with your wealth then? Well, I would say that they do what Australians always do when they find themselves with a bit of extra cash. They throw it at the property market. They look at investment properties. So the intergenerational wealth transfer will overwhelmingly be a property game, where people reinvest into property. And so there's so much money being churned through the system in the 2030s and 40s, an absolute maddening rate, so to speak, that we haven't seen. So I really do think that the 30s and 40s will be the wildest decade on the Australian property market ever.
Interestingly, Simon, I read research from the financial planning industry that women in particular are set to inherit a significant portion, around 65% of this wealth transfer, and was attributed to two key factors. Firstly, women tend to live longer than men, statistically increasing their likelihood of inheriting money from their spouses. But secondly, studies interestingly showed that in many families, the eldest daughter often takes charge of managing the finances after their parents pass away. That's something that surprised me.
Yeah, this probably has to do with the with broader financial responsibilities that are in households. It's still the case that quite often the household budget is managed by the wife. That's still the case, and so it makes sense then to go. Well, she, or the eldest daughter, then has more expertise with these kind of tasks than the next oldest male kid. I didn't know that. That's actually very, just interesting. And that's absolutely crucial information for financial advisors, for example. If you want to understand who your clients are, who really is managing the wealth that goes through your agency, through your institution, that's important. You then need to know, how do you speak to these women? Who are they? These will be millennial women in their 50s and 60s. What do they care about? And they will have a much more green undertone, if you will, with their money. So they want this money to be responsibly managed, meaning ecologically, environmentally friendly, socially friendly. So this ethical investment market, that should then benefit from this as well.
I'd like to just go back to something we started to discuss a moment ago, Simon, the bank of mum and dad, where parents financially assist their children with either deposits or gifts. That's already a major factor in our housing markets, but this leg up is going to increase the competition for properties, but maybe not evenly, because not everybody's got wealthy parents. But I read recently that in 2023 alone, parents contributed an estimated $2.7 billion to help their children into the real estate market, effectively making it one of Australia's largest lenders. And this great wealth transfer is only going to further solidify the affordability crisis, creating a two-tier system. Those with an inheritance to support them, they'll have a clear advantage over those who don't. Now, we're not giving financial advice here, but I think that it's going to be important to decide how you give this money to your children. And I know our good friend Ken Races had discussions with us at Wealth Retreat, and we've discussed it on the Michael Yardney podcast with him before, because you've got to be careful. Is it a loan? Is it a gift? If it's a gift, what happens if your children split up? Who gets to keep it? Do you give a bank guarantee for some or all of their loan? There's a number of different ways of doing it. And I think before you do this, you should actually seek good advice. And you've also got to have open discussions with your children about it, don't you?
Exactly. First and foremost, let's say it's $100,000. $100,000 for whatever it is a big transaction. No matter how rich you are, $100,000 transaction is a massive transaction. So you want to make sure that you do this transaction with all the right safeguards in place. Yeah. So do this. It's not just as easy as like, here's you're not handing over $50 at a birthday party to a teenager. You're doing this is a bigger thing that you're handing over. So this needs to be well managed, and you do want to have advice in this. Don't go this alone, otherwise you create more problems. And stuff like this you'll be forever resentful if the couple splits up and you don't have you haven't solved this in a sound way beforehand. So be honest that things can go wrong, things do go wrong, and you are not always the exception of the rule there. It's awkward, and you see how many awkward conversations are involved in this. Your own mortality, the idea that potentially your kids split up, your kids and their partner split up. That's challenging things to do. And so a financial advisor, for example, who might listen to this podcast and advises people on this, you need to be very skilled in encouraging people to have those conversations, in potentially moderating these kind of conversations. We see that there is much more need in financial advice for social, finessing and social skills, consulting skills than you might think at first glance.
I just want to interrupt this show to remind you that while you're listening to this on the Michael Yardney podcast feed, this show is really a special preview of the new Demographics Decoded podcast that I'm delivering each week with Simon Kuestenmacher. So even though you received it on the Michael Yardney feed, please take a second to stop this show now and search for Demographics Decoded and subscribe on the same podcast app you're listening to this on, or on YouTube. because we're also going to have a video of the show. Now, look, to make life easy, I'll be including links in the show notes, but this is only for the first couple of shows. We're also sharing them on this channel so you get to know what's ahead. I look forward to sharing 2 shows with you, the Michael Yardney podcast, specifically about property, success, money, wealth, and Demographics Decoded, where we unveil the trends shaping your future. Now, I want to discuss this topic in a bit more detail, but I'd like to just mention to people listening to this or viewing this podcast that if you're enjoying this information, this is the beginning of an ongoing series of weekly Demographics Decoded podcasts and videos that Simon and I are going to do to help investors, business people, entrepreneurs, employers, organizations understand what the future holds. So if you want to keep up to date with these, wherever you're listening to this or viewing this, just stop for a second, click the subscribe or follow button so you're going to get our weekly updates. Now, Simon, people can also follow you on social media, and in the show notes, I'm going to leave a link to that because I know that you have very frequent messages on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and even on Instagram, and I'll leave a link to my social media. But what you do at the Demographics Group is advise and consult to businesses, and I know that a large part of your days or weeks are spent doing talks to businesses to help them understand, and organizations, how these demographic changes can impact them and how to take advantage of them. So we'll leave a link to that in the show notes as well. So if people would be interested in you speaking to their organizations, that they can take advantage of this and get an unfair heads up on these things. Because I think this large transfer of wealth, Simon, is going to be much more than just money. I think it's going to change our society in some ways. I think it's got the potential to exacerbate the existing wealth inequality in Australia. That may not be a good thing, Simon.
Exactly. And so quite often you could argue that to a degree, this wealth jumps a generation. So if you inherit money in your early 60s, you might as well then soon have kids that look for housing. So the grandparents' wealth goes to the grandkids for their housing journey. And so then all of a sudden you have this young Gen Z cohort looking for housing in 10 years' time, who some of them will get money straight away and some won't. We probably won't have made housing much cheaper by then. And so really you split this in two. So you're definitely right. The inequality on the housing front will get worse, will intensify, so to speak. I don't think, though, that the market or the country as a whole will just let this happen without trying to counteract it. So you will then go, how can we counteract that? One way would be that we really suggest as we go, hey, how can we tap into this intergenerational wealth? And so this is what we talk about: death taxes, inheritance taxes that could be raised on this. We could be thinking about, well, how do we get a hand on this? That's what the state wants in a sense. The state goes, okay, there's a lot of wealth being transferred. How do we get a fair share of this? And what is a fair share? And that will be discussed in broad terms for a long time. But we need to become aware of this. This starts in about 5-6 years at scale. And I would suggest that there is taxation reform attached to this as well, because it is very clear that the inequality will be increased. What will this look like? I don't know. I don't know tax well enough to understand this. I just know what I do for as a trick always to understand what policy might look like in the future. I do read the policy writings of people 35 to 45 with the assumption that they are people that are already somewhat set in their mindset and they understand what they think about the world, but they're not in positions of power yet. And so those guys, we assume, of course, that they will stick to their guns. We assume that they will come into positions of power in a decade. Those guys and gals are writing about taxing wealth rather than taxing income and consumption. That's what we're doing at the moment. And so you'll then go, hey, how do we make sure that we tax wealth? And inheritance tax is an easy one. You would do that. That taxes wealth over a certain threshold. So it'll be a reasonably high threshold so that most people would actually not ever be impacted by this. We'd also think about stuff like stamp duty. That will be on the way out, where you tax the consumption of a house. And you will then go into land tax, where you tax the wealth of the overall house. And so therefore that would encourage people to downsize, because why would you want to live in a unnecessarily big house and pay for the privilege? But of course, those things are political poison, because the vast majority of Australia, still 2/3 of Australians, live in a house that they own. And nobody who listens to this, who owns their house, says, yeah, I would be delighted if I pay for the privilege of doing so. So it's hard to do this politically, but that's what the policy writing says or suggests might happen soon. And I keep a close tap on what's happening there.
That's a great insight to not think about what the current politicians are doing, but what the next generation are. Interestingly, Australia, unlike many other OECD countries, doesn't have a death tax. Most other countries do, don't they?
Exactly. So it's one of those things where Australia is a bit behind, if you will, but it's also therefore an easy prediction to make, to say this might happen. Then, of course, this needs to go through a political system. And as long as there is not a bipartisan agreement on this before you suggest a policy, this will not occur, because it's such an easy vote winner. If one party is dumb enough to suggest this, the other party just needs to oppose it and they are sure to be elected. So those kind of policy changes need to be agreed upon before they're being even suggested that they have bipartisan support. Otherwise, you don't do it. And is there the political appetite at the moment to run major bipartisan policies? Well, I leave this for you to answer.
Well, given the massive scale of this transfer, I think that families should be getting strategic advice. We've already explained that there are the issues with blended families and with broken families. So we're not in the position on this podcast to give specific advice, but general information would be it's going to create some complex issues. It's going to create some difficult discussions, as Simon said, emotionally charged issues. And now with more blended families, estranged relationships, it's unclear, even if you have a will, if you write a will and how you want your things to be passed on. Simon, I recently read that more and more wills are currently being contested, but what's shocked me was that 74% of will challenges are successful. So that actually highlights the importance of proper estate planning. It's one of the things the team at Metropole Wealth Advisory and Ken Race does. I think a well-drafted will, you can't just get a will online anymore. A well-drafted will clearly outlining your wishes minimises the ambiguity. It helps avoid costly and emotionally draining legal battles. And I think the other thing you've mentioned a couple of times is talking with your children about it, setting the expectations right. Doesn't mean they're going to listen or pay attention when you pass on, but it at least sets the tone of the future and everyone knows what your wishes were, Simon.
Exactly. And if you put yourself into the position of the person who is handing down the wealth, your ultimate wish is that the wealth that you accrued is serving your next generation, the next generations even, well. That's what you want. You want to know that this is in good hands, and you want to know that it had a positive impact. What can happen, though, at a wealth transfer is just that. We talk about a contested will. We talk about siblings fighting each other over your wealth. We're talking about families breaking apart because they contest these type of things. This is a god-awful thing to happen. So you are really in the position to do more than just handing over wealth. You can ensure that your kids still talk to each other years into the future. So you need to be crystal clear what it is. And also, I would always encourage people to downsize their wealth or downsize their belongings and have wealth easily accessible. It's easy to sell a house and then split it 2 or 3 ways, whatever. That's easy enough. But if you just look at your materialistic belongings and you get your 3 kids to, put a random pile of your belongings together, 100 items, and tell each kid, what is this item, what is this pile worth? They will come up with 3 different values. And that means that however they split up your materialistic belongings, it's all but certain that at least one of them will feel left out, shortchanged. That creates conflict, resentfulness towards their own siblings. That is something that you as an aging person can avoid by downsizing, by minimizing your belongings, by having a very, very clear strategy in place to do this. It's challenging again, but this wouldn't be the first family where people don't talk to each other afterwards. It's very, very common.
It is very, very common. I remember when my mother unfortunately died, we were lucky I had her till she was 93. We saw her belongings and there were two children, myself and my sister, and 12 grandchildren. Everyone wanted a little memento, and in fact, I've got one here in my office at home here from her, but no one wanted all the pictures and all the books and all the other things. It was more a nuisance than anything else. There were some nice memories we took, but most of the stuff really wasn't appropriate to have anymore.
Exactly. And so what you can do is earmark a couple of one or two meaningful momentums that will actually be treasured and hand them over. Hand them over now. That's the idea, is that is a meaningful thing that will be linked with you, with the positive memories that your kids, your grandkids, whoever associate with you, and they will treasure that. They would actually be devastated if this got stolen or broken or whatever. That's what you want. A treasured momentum. And even if it's gone, the memory of you will still be there. But you don't need to hand over too much materialistic stuff. It's too complex. So therefore, if you downsize over time, that is a good strategy, and you're really doing your kids a massive favor. And all the while, you might as well do yourself a favor if you move down to a house that is easier to manage than a big house. It takes away the hassle in old age.
Yes, it does. And I guess it's also important to remember it's not what you leave your kids, it's what you leave in your kids. So all the memories and all the good times you've had along the way are more important.
Purely self-interest. Spend this money on your kids while you enjoy it. Yeah, take them on a trip if you actually have enough wealth to do so. These are memories that you get to enjoy, and your kids can enjoy these memories in a much more meaningful way. Yeah, do this now. In a sense, I'm trying to encourage you to spend money now. This is, as long as you have enough wealth.
It'll help the economy.
Yeah,
definitely.
That's definitely also good.
So the monumental shift in wealth is going to represent more than just financial transactions. It's going to be a transformative phase in our society, in economics, and as we keep saying, in family dynamics. And as Australia navigates this great wealth transfer, I think managing it with foresight and responsibility is going to be essential, assuring that the broader society benefits and we don't split our society into have and have-nots like we've said. Now, if you've been listening to this show on your favourite podcast app or watching us on YouTube and you don't currently subscribe, just stop for a second and subscribe so that once a week you get the information from Simon and myself and the occasional guest we're going to have as well, where we're going to be discussing with you the demographic trends that are going to be affecting your business, your profession, your investments, and the decisions you should be making. Now, next week, Simon, I want to have a chat about our ageing population, how that's going to affect our housing markets, our economy, and what we need to understand.
It's one of the biggest and most exciting topics and most predictable topics in the coming decades. So, yeah, definitely stick around for next week. It'll be great fun.
This Demographics Decoded podcast was brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property and wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades and we've been helping clients with for over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. You can follow me on social media, but I suggest you also follow Simon Kuestenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all the social media platforms. I'll include links in the show notes. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Demographics Decoded podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. You'll be doing them a favour. I hope you will anyway, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to shape their future. And of course, any of the discussion we had today was not personal advice about your future, but just general information to help you.